I have a question for you. What would you do if you found out that the two people you cherish most in this world were nothing but enemies in disguise? This is the truly insane story of my sister Ella and how the one night that broke her also turned out to be one hell of a beautiful night.
Ella had been planning this night for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of hiding the restaurant reservation at the back of her email drafts. 3 weeks of coordinating with Daniel's colleague to keep him at the office until 8. Of sourcing his favorite wine, a Malbec he kept calling impossible to find, which she'd found because she always found things when she decided they mattered. 3 weeks of imagining the look on his face when she walked in. Tonight was their anniversary, 8 years. She had bought a dress she felt slightly ridiculous in, and then worn it anyway, because she wanted to feel like someone who still tried. She had the wine in a paper bag looped over her wrist. Her heart was doing that light, floating thing it did when she was genuinely happy, like something in her chest had briefly forgotten gravity. She used her key. She was going to surprise him. She surprised herself instead. She knew that before she reached the bedroom. There was a coat on the armchair she recognized, a shoe by the couch that wasn't Daniel's, a perfume in the air she'd smelled 1,000 times, at brunch tables and car rides, at the side of a hospital bed when Ella's mother was dying, and Nadia had flown in from a work trip to be there. Nadia. Ella's hand pushed the door before her mind gave the instruction. The world did not shatter. That is what the movies get catastrophically wrong. The world doesn't shatter, it tilts, slowly, irrevocably, like a table that has quietly lost a leg and is only now revealing that everything you placed on it was always going to slide. Daniel, in the bed they shared, the bed she had made that morning, pulling the duvet straight the way she always did, smoothing the pillow on her side. And Nadia, who had sat across from Ella in this same apartment 3 weeks ago, cross-legged on the couch, eating takeout from paper containers, laughing about something Ella couldn't even remember now. Nadia, whose name Ella had given to the hospital as emergency contact. Nadia, who had cried at Ella's mother's funeral and called her my person in the speech. Nadia, who had been doing this. Who had been sitting across from her and laughing with full knowledge of what she was doing for however long this had been going on. The wine slipped from Ella's hand. She didn't notice it fall. She stood there for what felt like a long time but was probably 3 seconds. Long enough to see Daniel's face go white. Long enough to see Nadia pull the sheet upward and refuse to meet her eyes. Long enough for something in Ella's chest, something she had spent 8 years building, carefully, faithfully, with everything she had, to go completely quiet. Not loud, not a crack or a crash, just quiet, the way a fire goes quiet when the last of the air runs out. She turned around, she walked to the kitchen, she set her key on the counter, and she left. She made it to her car before it hit her, and when it hit her completely. She had always thought of herself as someone who would scream when something like this happened. She had a temper. She had always had a temper. She had imagined herself throwing things, saying the things she'd always been too composed to say. She had imagined herself a storm. She was not a storm. She was a woman folded over a steering wheel in a parking lot, crying in a way she had not cried since the night her mother died. The kind of crying that has nothing to do with tears. The kind that comes from somewhere the body doesn't even have a name for. Somewhere below the stomach, below logic, below every coping mechanism she had ever built. She cried for Daniel. She cried for Nadia. She cried for the 8 years she had given without ever once hedging her bets. She cried because she had been faithful, completely, stupidly faithful, and she had been the only one. She cried until she was empty, and when it was over, when the crying finished the way hard rain finishes, suddenly, without warning, she sat up. She looked at herself in the rearview mirror, she wiped her face, she reapplied her lipstick from memory because her hands needed something to do. Then she started the car and drove because sitting still was not an option. Sitting still meant feeling it, and she had already felt all of it she could handle for one night. She didn't plan to stop where she stopped. She saw a sign, felt the bass through the floor of the car, and pulled over. She sat for a moment looking at the entrance. She was not the kind of woman who walked into clubs alone on a Thursday night. She was the kind of woman who went to bed at 10, who had a skincare routine, who planned things 3 weeks in advance. But that woman had just left her key on a kitchen counter and walked out of 8 years. That woman had just discovered that the two people she trusted most had been lying to her face. That woman had just cried until her body ran out of the ability to cry. So Ella got out of her car, walked to the entrance, and went inside. She found a seat at the far end of the bar and ordered a whiskey sour, which was not what she usually drank, and she did it on purpose. She wanted to be someone different tonight, even in something as small as a drink order. She was on her second one when he sat down 2 stools away. He didn't try to talk to her, didn't look at her the way men in bars usually look at women sitting alone. He just ordered his drink and stared at it like it had personally offended him, like he was carrying something tonight too. She found herself saying, "The bourbon won't help, trust me. I've been testing that theory for the past 40 minutes. He looked at her. His eyes were slow, unhurried. They didn't scan her the way men's eyes usually do, up, down, assessment, conclusion. They just landed on her face and stayed there. It was the first kind thing that had happened to her all night. "Is the verdict in?" he asked. "Jury's still deliberating, but it's not looking good for the bourbon." He almost smiled, not quite, but almost. "Elliot," he said. "Ella." They didn't offer last names. It felt like an agreement neither of them discussed. They talked for 4 hours. Not the polished kind of conversation that people assemble at events, the curated anecdotes, the impression management, the version of yourself you bring out for strangers you want to think well of you. They talked the way people talk at 2 a.m. when they're stripped of pretense by exhaustion and grief and the particular honesty of having nothing left to protect. She told him about Daniel, in the same breath as the anniversary and the wine and the 3 weeks of planning, and she watched a muscle in the side of his jaw tick as she spoke. She told him about Nadia, not just the betrayal, but the specific weight of it, the way you cannot mourn a friendship and a relationship simultaneously because they are the same wound, because the person you would normally call when your life falls apart is the person who took it apart. "There's no shelf for it," she said. "I keep trying to find a shelf, and there isn't one." He said, "Some things don't have shelves. Some things just sit in the middle of the room and you walk around them. For a while you do it consciously. Then one day you realize you're doing it without thinking. Then one day you realize you're not doing it at all." She looked at him. "What's sitting in the middle of your room?" she asked. He turned his glass slowly between both palms. The music moved behind them. Somewhere on the dance floor, someone laughed at a pitch that cut through the bass. "A life I said yes to before I understood the question," he said. "An engagement that was less a choice and more convergence of timing, of expectation, of being raised to believe that certain things are what love looks like, until you're inside those things and you realize you've been confusing love with legibility, with looking correct from the outside." Ella said nothing for a moment. "Are you happy?" she asked. "No." No pause, no qualification. The honesty of it landed between them like something solid. "I thought I was happy for 8 years," she said. "Tonight I found out I was comfortable. There's a difference. I didn't know there was a difference until tonight." Most people don't, not until something forces the comparison. She held up her glass slightly. "Here's to forced comparisons." He touched his glass to hers, and to the strangers who understand them. Around 2 a.m., the bar emptied. They had moved, at some point she couldn't locate in memory, from the stools to a corner booth. That was the mark of a conversation that holds you completely. You forget you have a body. You forget you are somewhere specific. You are only in the words. She told him about Daniel, how she'd lost her at 26, mid-career, mid-relationship, at exactly the age when you are most certain of your own invulnerability, how grief had reorganized her priorities in ways she hadn't fully untangled, how she had clung to Daniel, partly because he had been there, solid when everything else was falling apart, and she wondered now, tonight, whether she had mistaken his presence for love, whether she'd confused being held for being chosen. He listened the way very few people listen, not waiting for his turn, not assembling a response while she was still speaking, just there, his entire attention given like a gift, like something he decided to give on purpose. She hadn't been listened to like that in a long time. She hadn't known she was starving for it until she suddenly had it. Tell me something true about yourself, something you don't usually say out loud. He sat with the question, the way he sat with things, unhurried, giving them the time they needed. I have never made a decision entirely for myself, he said. Every choice I've ever made had someone else's expectation folded inside it. My father's, my family's, my engagements, not because she demanded it, but because I don't know who I am when I'm not performing for an audience. I don't know what I want when no one's watching. That's what's in the middle of my room. I have never once found out who I am when no one needs me to be something specific. A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable, honest. I think you're someone who listens extraordinarily well, Ella said quietly, for whatever that's worth to you. He looked at her. Something moved beneath the surface of his face, something kept carefully back that came for a moment, forward. Tonight, he said, it's worth quite a lot. They shared the most passionate kiss she could remember having, the kind that makes you forget you just saw your boyfriend of 8 years in bed with your best friend, the kind that makes you want this stranger right in front of you, the kind that makes you want to lose every virtue you have left. She has tried many times since to explain what happened next. Not to justify it. She is not a person who needs to justify herself to herself. Not to make it into something it wasn't, but to name it honestly, because she has always believed that the things we experience deserve their true names. She was broken open. The night had stripped every careful layer from her, and what was underneath was not shameful. It was simply human, raw and aching and hungry for contact in the deepest sense, to be touched by someone who saw her, not the version of her that planned the anniversary and sourced the wine, the actual her, the one sitting in a corner booth at 2 a.m. with grief she hadn't found words for and a shaking she'd mostly controlled but not entirely. He saw her. She felt it. She knows how that sounds. She knows it sounds like the kind of thing that is easy to say and nearly impossible to defend. But she felt it. And she was a woman who had spent 8 years being looked at by someone who didn't see her, so she knew the difference. She knew it the way you know warmth after cold. She made the choice, consciously, with her eyes open. She knew it was impulsive. She knew she might regret it. She knew this was not the version of herself that planned carefully and thought 3 steps ahead. She made the choice with her eyes open. That matters. She made the choice with her eyes open. And she was not sorry. Not that night, and not in the morning after. What came later was something else entirely. In the morning, they lay side by side and didn't pretend it was nothing. I don't know how to do this part. I just want to be upfront about that. Neither do I. Same. She looked at the ceiling. Last night was real, he said. She turned her head. He was already looking at her. What do you do with real? She asked. I think, he said slowly, I need to go home and be honest about a lot of things. And I think you need to get through today, which is its own battle. She sat up, reached for her dress. I don't want your number. He didn't flinch, so she kept going. It's not because last night didn't matter. It's because I can't carry anything else heavy right now. I want to keep this as something that was whole, its own complete thing, not the beginning of something I have to wait on. He was quiet for a moment. That makes more sense than anyone has said to me in a long time. She stood. She put on her dress. She was almost at the door when he said, her name, Ella. She turned. I hope today is gentler than you think it's going to be. In that moment, she felt something, but she couldn't quite name it. I hope you figure out who you are when no one's watching. I mean that. She walked out into the morning and got into a cab and told herself that night was sealed, done, complete, a thing she would carry without apology and without explanation. She had no idea what else she was already carrying.
6 weeks later, the test came back positive. She bought a second one. Same result. She sat in her car for over an hour and a half doing nothing, just sitting, just breathing, just listening to the sound of her own heartbeat and trying to locate her next thought. The next thought wouldn't come. There was just silence where a plan usually was. She drove to her sister's house. Phoebe opened the door, took one look at her face and stepped back without saying anything. That was what sisters who had watched you through everything were for. They read your face before you find your words. She made tea. Ella sat down. "I'm pregnant," Ella said. "The father is a man I met the night I found out about Daniel. I don't know his last name." Phoebe set her cup down. "Are you okay?" "No, but I'm not falling apart either. I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm trying to find the next step and I can't see it yet." "What do you want to do?" Ella wrapped both hands around her mug. She thought about the morning, the silver light through the curtains, the way his eyes had settled on her face and stayed, the word he'd used, real. She thought about how she'd left, telling herself, carry it without apology. She hadn't known then how literal that was going to be. "I don't know yet," she said. "I need a few days before I can know. Can I stay tonight?" Phoebe moved her chair around the table until she was sitting close. "As long as you need," she said. Ella leaned her head on her sister's shoulder and thought, one thing at a time, just one thing. She made the appointment for a Tuesday, 3rd week of the month, 10 a.m. She put it in her phone like a dentist appointment. Calendar entry, no title, just a location. She drove herself. She needed to do this part alone. Not because she was performing strength, but because there are some decisions a person has to arrive at without the weight of another's love pressing on the space around them. The waiting room was pale and deliberately inoffensive. She opened a magazine and read the same sentence 4 times. She thought about the logical case, which was ironclad. She was 31, single, recently displaced, professionally mid-ascent, the father a stranger whose last name she had never learned. She had no architecture in place for this. The logic was airtight. The nurse called her name. Ella stood. She was already walking toward the counter when it happened. Not a voice, not a vision, nothing that could be pointed to, more like a weight shift. The way a scale tips when the imbalance is very small, but has been building a long time, and finally, in one quiet moment, becomes definitive. She stopped. The nurse waited with the patience of someone who had seen this pause before. Ella looked at the floor. She breathed. She tried to locate the thing and name it. She didn't want to undo it. Not sentiment, not ideology. Something older and quieter than both. Something that registered in the body before the mind could form an argument around it. Something that said, this thing that started in the worst night of your life might not be a wound. It might be a door. You don't know yet which one it is, but you will not know if you don't walk through it. "I need to reschedule," she said. Her voice was steady. It surprised her. "I'm sorry." The nurse nodded. No judgment. She had seen this too. Ella walked back through the pale waiting room, through the glass door, into the afternoon. She sat on the bench outside and placed both hands flat on her knees and breathed. And rising slowly through the fear, undeniable, embarrassing, completely real, relief. The months fell into each other, slowly inside, fast from a distance. Her body declared its agenda without consulting her, and she negotiated with it daily. The nausea that made her late to her own meetings, the fatigue that blunted the sharp edges she'd always depended on, the way her coffee tasted wrong, and her favorite candle became unbearable. She was not a woman who took being overruled by her own body gracefully. But underneath the resistance, something was quietly happening.
The first ultrasound, a heartbeat in a dark room, amplified, not hers. The first kick at 3 a.m., her palm flat against the curve of her stomach, and something real and insistent pressing back, as if to say, "I'm here. Stop pretending you don't know it." She stopped pretending. She told her boss at 16 weeks. He reorganized his expression admirably. 2 weeks later, the promotion she'd long wanted, prayed for, and worked so hard for came through. She accepted it with the satisfaction of a woman who had done excellent work while internally on fire. She did not look for Elliot. She hasn't looked for him since that night. She didn't want to destroy his life by dragging him into this chaos of a world she called hers. She just wanted him to have a good life, as she tried having hers as well. She turned it over. She had a first name and a face and a conversation she could recite nearly word for word. She was resourceful. She had located an impossible wine in 3 weeks. But she kept returning to what she'd said to herself walking out of his hotel room, not because she was owed anything. This was her choice, her child. She would not deliver a pregnancy to a stranger's door and call it connection. If he were ever in Ivy's life, it would not be because Ella had gone looking with a child in her hands. It would have to be something else. She didn't know then that it would be. Her daughter arrived on a Thursday afternoon, 14 hours in, Phoebe at her side the entire time, wearing the expression of someone performing an act of profound love without requiring any acknowledgement for it. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Small, furious, perfect. Ella named her Ivy. She had a list of 23 names, researched and cross-referenced and assessed for sound and meaning and the way they'd feel at different ages. She was thorough. She was organized. She held her daughter for the first time, and the list became completely irrelevant. Ivy, because she grew in the crack of something broken and came through regardless, because she was persistent and rooted and real, because her grandmother had kept Ivy on every windowsill of every house she'd ever lived in and called it the plant that outlasts everything. Ella held her daughter in the pale hospital light and understood with a clarity that reorganized something fundamental in her, that she had been wrong about what it meant to be ready, wrong about what it meant to be strong, wrong about what she'd thought of as the worst night of her life. The worst night of her life had sent her here. She looked at Ivy's face, the unfocused eyes, the tight curled fists of someone who had arrived, ready to hold on. "Hi," she said. Her voice was wrecked. She didn't care. "Hi, I'm your mom. I have no idea what I'm doing. I am so glad you're here." 14 months later, Phoebe forced Ella into a dress and sent her to a charity gala she had no intention of attending. "You have not left this apartment in the evening in 3 months, Phoebe said. "Ivy stays with me. You are going." "I have a morning. It's Friday, Ella." So she grudgingly went, only to fulfill her promise to her sister, the only one who had been by her side when her world came crashing, the only one who held her hands on the nights she thought she couldn't get through, and whispered words of encouragement to her. She went to make Phoebe happy, and maybe to find a part of herself again. It was a rooftop venue in the center of the city, string lights, standing tables, the whole glittering skyline arranged behind it like a backdrop someone had commissioned. She arrived, accepted something sparkling, and positioned herself near the railing with the air of a woman attending an event successfully. She heard him before she saw him. The laugh, low, genuine, slightly surprised, the specific laugh of a man not expecting to find something funny. She had heard it once before, in a club that felt like another lifetime, in a conversation that had quietly altered the molecular structure of the 14 months that followed it. Her body registered it before her mind did. Her grip tightened on the glass. Her spine straightened. She turned. Across the rooftop, 30 feet, 40, stood Elliot, broader than she remembered, more polished. He was in a suit that communicated serious money without advertising it. He was in conversation with 3 other people, his bearing easy and authoritative, in a way that hadn't been visible in a bar at midnight. He'd been stripped of context then. Here, he was clearly a man who occupied the center of rooms. And beside him, her hand in the crook of his arm, beautiful, composed, the kind of woman who wears event spaces the way Ella wore discomfort, naturally, without effort, the posture that says, "This man is mine," not loudly, just simply, the way things that have been true a long time become simple. Ella turned back to the railing. Both hands found the cold metal. She should leave. She needed to leave. She was going to leave right now. She was already calculating the exit route. "Ella!" His voice, right behind her. She closed her eyes for the length of one full breath. Then she turned around. He was looking at her the way she remembered, that landing quality to his gaze, that complete, unhurried presence. But something had changed behind it, something that moved. "I thought I was seeing things," he said quietly. His voice was low, private. 20 feet away, his fiancée had turned to speak to someone else. "You're not," Ella said. "How are you?" The question was too simple for everything it held. She thought about Ivy, 14 months old, asleep at her sister's house right now, fists curled, completely unaware that her father was standing 30 feet from her mother on a rooftop in the city where they both lived. She thought about what she had promised herself, that if the choice was ever removed from her hands, if fate made the decision for her, she would not hold it back. Fate, apparently, had a very specific sense of humor. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. "I need you to know first that I'm not here to disrupt your life. I'm not asking for anything, but I made a promise to myself, and I can't unknow that you're standing here. So..." She watched his face begin to change. Slowly, the way a face changes when it understands that the sentence it's about to receive is heavier than its words. "Tell me," he said. She told him.
Thank you for being a part of my story. I'd want you to know that stories like this take a lot of effort to bring to life, and I'd love you to appreciate the effort we put in. Kindly hit the subscribe button to show me you appreciate my effort. Also, what part of the world are you watching this video from? I'd love to know.
They found a service alcove behind a large planter. The gala continued around them, indifferent. The city spread out beyond the railing like an audience. She was clinical. She gave him facts without decoration. 6 weeks after the night they'd shared, a pregnancy she hadn't planned. A daughter, now 14 months old, named Ivy. She had not searched for him, deliberately, on principle. She had chosen to raise Ivy alone rather than arrive at his door carrying obligation like a burden she had decided was his. She said it all quickly, then stopped. He said nothing for a long time. "How old is she?" he said, finally. 14 months. She just started walking. She falls constantly and gets back up immediately and does not appear to understand that falling is supposed to be discouraging. She hadn't meant to say the last part. It had come through a crack in her composure before she could close it. Elliot looked at her. Something in his face she couldn't quite read, and she was good at reading people. "Ella," he said, "that is my daughter." "Yes. You raised her alone for 14 months because you didn't want me to come out of obligation." "I raised her alone for 14 months because she is mine and I chose to, and also, yes, because I had enough of obligation. I didn't want that to be the reason you showed up." His jaw was tight. She watched him work through something large that moved through him like a tide changing. "I'm engaged," he said, accounting, not defending. "I know. I saw her. I've been telling myself for over a year that the life I'm in is what grown-up love looks like, that comfortable is enough, that fine is what you settle into." He looked at her. "You said something almost exactly like that to me once." "In a bar," she said, "at 2 a.m. "I've never stopped thinking about it," he said, "about you. I told myself it was just the residue of a memorable night, that it would fade. She was very still. "Did it?" she asked. The look he gave her answered before his mouth did. "No," he said. "Not at all." They looked at each other deeply, with the same passion and comfort as they did on the first night they met, the first night they shared the most intimate moment of his life. And in that moment, he made a decision he had long planned but hadn't brought himself to executing it. He ended the engagement on a Wednesday morning. The call with Claudette was 40 minutes long and honest in ways that were painful for both of them, because Claudette was not a villain. She was a woman who had agreed in good faith to a life with someone who had never been entirely present in it, and she deserved better than the honesty he was now delivering. She said before she hung up, "I knew something was missing. I kept waiting for you to find it here, with me." He said, "I'm sorry. You deserved someone who was entirely here." She said, "Yes, I did." The call with his mother lasted 2 hours. His father listened the way he always listened, completely, without interruption, then spoke once. "Tell me about her," Elliot said. She found out she was pregnant and chose to raise the child alone rather than call a stranger out of obligation. She got promoted while she was pregnant. She named her daughter after a plant that grows through cracks. She has never asked me for anything. She wasn't even going to tell me, only told me because she'd made a promise to herself that she kept. His father was quiet for a moment. "She sounds," he said, "like the kind of person worth disrupting your life for." "Yes," Elliot said, "she does." He called her 5 days after the gala. She had spent those 5 days telling herself she wasn't waiting for the call. She was very convincing. She was almost completely convinced. She answered on the second ring. That told her everything about how convinced she actually was. "Elliot Ashford," he said. "That's my full name. I should have given it to you 14 months ago. I'm sorry it took this long." She sat down on the kitchen floor. She had started to notice that floors were where she ended up when news outgrew her body's ability to stand. "What did you do?" she asked. "I ended the engagement 5 days ago. I talked to my family, and I'm calling because I would like, if you'll allow it, to meet my daughter. Not to take anything over, not to arrive and rearrange what you've built, just to know her." She said nothing. "And I want you to know that ending things was not about finding out I had a child. The engagement was wrong before. Ivy just made it impossible to keep pretending otherwise. I don't want you to think this is obligation. I've had enough of obligation to last my whole life." The silence on the call was loud. Ivy was asleep in the next room. The apartment was quiet around Ella's heartbeat. "You can come Sunday, early. She's a morning person. I don't know where she gets it. It's not from me." She heard something release in his voice, something that had been held tightly letting go. "Thank you," he said, and the words meant several things at once. He arrived at 9, slightly early, carrying a bag he could tell he had stood in a shop for a long time choosing and then second-guessed all the way to her door. She let him in. Ivy was in the living room doing something important with her stacking rings. She had a whole system. No one else understood the system, but she was committed to it. Elliot stopped in the doorway and looked at her. Something in his face she couldn't quite read, and she was good at reading people. "Ella?" She watched him, a man she barely knew, come apart quietly in a doorway on a Sunday morning. No sound, no drama, just the complete silent reorganization of a person who has just understood something that changes what everything else means. He stood there and looked at Ivy the way you look at something you didn't know you'd been waiting for your whole life. He crossed the room and crouched down. Ivy looked up, assessed him with the unsentimental scrutiny of a 14-year-old who has not yet learned to perform interest. Then she held out one of her rings. He took them. His hand wasn't steady. "Hi," he said, just above a whisper. "Hi, Ivy." Ivy looked at him for one more moment, decided he was acceptable, turned back to her project. He looked up at Ella. His eyes were bright in a way he wasn't trying to hide. She said nothing. She went to make coffee. some things need space to exist. They did not fall into each other easily. That was never the story. The story was slower and more honest than that. It was Sunday mornings that became a habit neither of them discussed. They just kept happening. Tuesday dinners that ran too long and then longer. The night Ivy had a fever and Ella texted him at 11 p.m. without quite knowing why, and he called within minutes and stayed on the line until the fever broke, not saying anything particularly helpful, but being there, which was the only thing that helped anyway. He watched him the way he asked her to, deliberately. He showed up. Not grandly, not dramatically, for the ordinary things, the ordinary pediatrician appointment he put in his own calendar without being asked, the pharmacy run on a Wednesday night because her usual one was closed, the Thursdays he spent on her living room floor with Ivy while she worked late, sending her photos that were always some variation of Ivy's face wearing extreme concentration over something that appeared to be extremely important to Ivy and no one else. He showed up. And showed up, and showed up. Ella had spent years learning what it looked like when someone showed up for reasons that had nothing to do with you. She knew the difference now. This was not that. This was someone choosing every ordinary Tuesday, every unremarkable Thursday, to be present. And that, she was slowly understanding, was what love actually looked like when it wasn't performing. Ivy's second birthday came. A leaning cake with IVY iced and smudged rose pink, Phoebe's streamers in 3 clashing colors, Elliot and a series of balloons that were not cooperating. Loud, chaotic, warm in a way that can only come from people. Ella stood at the counter and looked at the room, at Phoebe laughing, at her stepmother, who had stopped reorganizing and was watching Ivy with the particular expression of grandmothers who were trying very hard not to cry. At Ivy in her high chair, investigating a napkin with the focus of a scientist. At Elliot, who had finally won against the balloon and was turning around. He looked up and caught her looking, mouthed, "Are you okay?" She laughed, the real kind. The kind that catches you before you can decide whether to let it out. She nodded. She thought, I did not plan this, any of this. Not this kitchen, not this chaos, not this man, not this child who is trying to eat a paper napkin while everyone she loves stands around her. She thought, I tried to undo this. I sat in a waiting room and I was going to undo this. She thought, I am so glad I didn't. Later, after the cake and the noise, after Ivy was down, finally, one fist curled under her chin the way she always slept, like she was holding on to something even in her sleep. Ella and Elliot stood at the crib in the dark, not touching, just present with each other. She fell down 6 times today, he said quietly. Got up every single time without making a sound about it. She always does, like she doesn't know falling is supposed to mean something. I hope she never learns that it does. They stood in the quiet for a moment. Elliot? Yeah? She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. I want to try, she said. Not because Ivy makes it convenient, not because it makes the story neater, because I've been watching you for 6 months and I haven't been disappointed once, and I know what it costs to say that. I know what it means when someone shows up for the ordinary things without needing to be thanked for it. I've been careful for a very long time. I want to try being less careful with you. He didn't make a speech about it. He reached over and took her hand, not dramatically, the way you take someone's hand when you intend to keep holding it. I will spend every single day, he said, trying to be worth that. Ivy slept peacefully. The city moved outside, the same city that had held all of it, the night of the betrayal, the parking lot, the bar, the morning after, the clinic, the labor ward, the rooftop, the city that had watched it all happen and kept moving regardless, the way cities do, the way life does. It had all been moving toward this. She just hadn't been able to see it from inside it. She didn't get the life she planned. She got the life she earned. And the child she once sat in a waiting room trying to undo became the most beautiful thing she ever made.